Hi everyone, welcome to the February 2nd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined by my usual co-host Craig Milkowski in just a moment. On this week's podcast, we're going to take a look back at last weekend's racing, really headlined by a couple of Derby preps, which we'll start off this podcast by discussing. Those were the Holy Bull at Gulfstream and the Robert B. Lewis, I wanted to say the San Felipe, the Robert B. Lewis out at Santa Anita, which is a prep for the San Felipe. They both had winners that were pretty impressive. Greatest Honor and Medina Spirit. We'll get into the details of those races in a little bit. Moving on to Santa Anita, we'll talk about the other graded stakes that took place there on Saturday, the San Pasqual for the older horses. They also ran plenty of stakes races at Gulfstream on both the dirt and the turf. We'll talk about a few of those. Then move on to some other venues. We'll recap a couple of stakes races from Oaklawn Saturday card, where they got plenty of rain and contested a few stakes in the mud. Sam Houston on Sunday. We handicapped a few of those races on the forecast last week. We'll recap those selections and talk about the impressive winner of the Houston Ladies Classic. And then we'll finish things up at the fairground, where there weren't really any stakes of note, but there was a pretty impressive maiden winner that we'll get to at the end of the podcast. But Craig, the thing that had most people talking this week are those two Derby preps, the one in Florida and out in California. It seems like both of these horses have rocketed up people's Derby lists.
Yeah, we saw two good performances, I think. They were both about equally well, as we'll talk about when we get to the figures and discuss them individually. But particularly Greatest Honor, he hadn't really run a fast race before. He wasn't even the favorite in his. So I thought he was a little bit more surprising of the two, but both were really good efforts in different ways.
Let's start at Gulfstream with that Holy Bull. Greatest Honor, the winner of that race by open lengths. His main rival in this race, Prime Factor, just didn't show up with the effort that I think people were expecting out of him. I think many were anticipating an improved effort as he stretched out in distance. That didn't happen. Greatest Honor instead was the horse that took the big step forward, and that is kind of Shug McGahee's style. He can bring these horses along slowly. Once they get rolling, they can just continue improving, and it certainly seems like that's the trajectory that Greatest Honor's on.
Yeah, this was a good call by you on the forecast. I mean, he was only 5-2, so I don't want to shower you with too much praise. But in all honesty, I mean, he won like he was 2-5. So it was just a really nice effort. He got a 1:15 TimeformUS speed figure, a pretty big jump over his low hundreds that he had been running, as you predicted, and just a really good effort. I thought Prime Factor was interesting. I know neither one of us really cared for him much on the forecast, and he basically ran the same figure that he did in his debut. He got another 106. He just ran into a better group, and I also thought the runner-up Tarantino ran well. He pressed a pretty quick pace. Was able to hold on for second, a well-beaten second, but he still got a 1:11 TimeformUS speed figure. And despite winning two of his first three on turf, this is a horse I think they need to keep on the dirt, because that is a pretty big figure discrepancy there.
Yeah, Tarantino was somewhat game to come back for second here. Though as I rewatched the race, to me it looked more like a function of Prime Factor just totally spitting the bit at the top of the stretch. I mean, that horse, he ranged up and actually passed Tarantino at the quarter pole, and then he just didn't go on after that, and certainly seems like a horse that isn't going to relish added ground, though I suppose something might have happened to him in this race. Maybe he's come out with an issue. I don't really know. I didn't see any quotes about that. But he certainly looked like a horse to me that doesn't want to go much farther than this, or potentially not even farther than one turn. Tarantino did run well in his first start on the dirt here, though Greatest Honor was much the best. My one problem with Greatest Honor going forward is that it seems like after this race, his bandwagon has suddenly gotten very crowded, because he was visually impressive winning this race. He's got one of those pedigrees that people just love for the Triple Crown races. He's by Tappet. His second dam is that excellent producer, Better Than Honor, who's the dam of Jazzle and Rags to Riches, making his dam a half-sister to those horses. So it's just so much pointing to this horse as being one with the potential to go that 10 furlongs or potentially even a mile and a half in the Belmont Stakes. And I'm sure he's going to take a lot of money when he comes back in whatever Derby prep Shug chooses for him next time. So I would just beware of getting value on this horse in the future. I think that might be gone after this race. But he's certainly one that's in the conversation after this performance.
Yeah, you make a good point. That 1:15, that just kind of puts him near the top of a crowded top. It's been a pretty good crop of horses that are running pretty fast speed figures. And the margin of victory is probably flattered by beating a few horses that, although I said Tarantino did run pretty well, I don't think he wants to go another step further than what we saw. Neither does Prime Factor, and just nobody else really showed up. So I think the 115 tells you more about Greatest Honor than that 5 3/4 length victory. He's not one I would want to say could have won by more and could have run faster. I think he just looks flattered because of what was in behind him, which turned out to be not much at all.
Let's hop on over to Santa Anita, where that other Derby prep was run on Saturday. We'll get back to Gulfstream in a little bit and finish up their card there, but wanted to do these Derby preps at the top of the show. The Santa Anita prep was the Grade 3 Robert B. Lewis, and this was a very exciting race to watch and an extremely game performance by the winner, Medina Spirit.
Yeah, this was another big effort from him. I know we both liked this race last time, and he just... Man, was he game on Saturday. He set a very fast pace, breaking from that inside rail position. His pace figures are in the 150s early, his half-mile figure of 151. And then he was able to fight off the challenges of first Hot Rod Charlie, then Roman Centurion, both of whom I thought ran very well. But Medina Spirit wound up with a 117 TimeformUS speed figure, a 6-point boost over his final time figure of 111 due to that fast pace. And yeah, I just have no knocks on this horse. I think he was kind of forced. His hand was forced by that inside draw. I don't think he's a horse that has to be up front, and I'd much prefer to see him draw in the middle or a little bit more outside, where maybe he could sit off the pace. But he showed he's pretty versatile in this spot, and really nice run. Your pick, Roman Centurion, ran well at a big price. I thought he had it coming down the lane. I really did. The one footnote I'd put on this is I would really be interested to see what would happen if they would be able to use the whip rules we see in most places, because I do think that had a small effect on the outcome here.
Yeah, I can't really comment on the whip rule. I don't know what the effect of that is. I've obviously watched a limited number of races from Santa Anita, and I know some people are convinced that the outcomes of these races have been drastically affected by not being able to whip the horses with that overhanded motion that you are at other tracks. I frankly don't know about that, and I think it's just conjecture to make that argument based on what we've seen. But I certainly respect the opinions of some people that have that view. As for Medina Spirit, though, I was really impressed by this performance. I mean, how could you not be? He set that incredibly fast pace, and you said he got a 6-point bonus from the 111 final time figure. That might not sound like a lot, but in dirt routes, I mean, you don't see much bigger bonuses than that with horses that win these races. You do see much bigger bonuses that horses get in sprint races, where the paces can be, you get more of a bonus for setting a fast pace in a sprint race. I know there are reasons for that because of how horses run back, and sometimes fast paces in route races, they don't deserve the same credit. But this was a situation where the pace was such an outlier that Medina Spirit, he really did run so much better than the horses that were second and third behind him. And there was a big gap back to the rest of the runners. So I think that kind of validates the high speed figures that all of these horses got. The top three all got numbers above 110. And now Medina Spirit's paired up two numbers, 117 and 118, that really put him right towards the top of this class. And I know some would consider him to be Bob Baffert's second string, or some would probably even go so far to consider him Baffert's third string, maybe even behind a horse that's never raced before. But I mean, to me, Medina Spirit is the horse you want in the Bob Baffert barn right now, and is just a very exciting horse moving forward on the Kentucky Derby Trail. Even watching the end of this race, I mean, I agree with you. Coming to the top of the stretch, I thought Roman Centurion was home. He ranged up outside of those horses, had all the momentum, and just couldn't go on with it. And I know some people might say, oh, well, you know, the whip roll might have affected him. Well, it wasn't the horse that it was supposed to affect, Medina Spirit, who was idling at the top of the stretch, needed something to kind of wake him up and refocus. And it turned out it was just getting a challenge from other horses, because he rebroke and finished this race strongly. And even if you watch the gallop out past the wire, it's not like those two horses, Hot Rod Charlie and Roman Centurion, went past. Medina Spirit actually galloped out away from them past the finish line. So I just think there's a lot to like about this horse's performance. And I agree with what you said, Craig, about him not being a need the lead type. The one thing I've noticed about his last two races is that he is extremely sharp away from the gate. He broke in front in this race. He actually outbroke Life is Good in the Sham by about a length, and then they reined him in to stalk in that race. But I love a horse that has these really good gait habits like he does, and I just think it gives the rider a lot of options. They went to the front this time, but I think they can get him back off the pace in the future.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I'm one. I want him to go if by all means they can. I just don't think he's the kind that if he does break well and another horse is determined to get the lead, that he's going to fight with him. So really impressive effort, and really good point you make about the whip thing. If anybody needed it, it probably was him. And just kind of an aside there, I have no problem with the new whip rule personally, because anything that makes the sport more appealing to people who might decide to get interested in it, I'm all for it. And as long as everybody's playing by the same rules, it's okay by me.
Yeah, it's the whip rule. I have mixed feelings about it. I think you have to go one way or the other way in terms of pro whip or anti whip. I think making a rule about how you use the whip is something that's just really difficult to communicate to people who aren't in the horse racing world. And it seems like a decision that just makes racing executives feel good, like they're doing something, but doesn't actually go all the way to make that public relations difference that they wanted to make. So I don't know. I just feel like it's a half measure that doesn't actually accomplish what people wanted to accomplish. So we'll see if that evolves over time and if it's widespread across all jurisdictions, because I just don't think it makes sense to have one jurisdiction doing it and others not, especially when you have riders hopping from one racetrack to the other, especially those elite riders who have to make those adjustments. It's just not really fair. So we'll see how that develops in the future, but that's just my 2 cents on the whip rule. Sticking at Santa Anita for now, talking about the other graded stakes they ran on that Saturday card, the San Pasqual for the older horses. This was run 2 races before the Robert B. Lewis. Express Train is a horse that had shown real promise as a 2-year-old. I think he had broken his maiden by something like 14 lengths at Del Mar, and then lost the American Pharaoh, like that grade 1 prep for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile after that. His 3-year-old season was kind of lost a little bit. It took him a long time to get going, but it looked like he got back on track in the Malibu prior to this, and he definitely improved with the stretch out and distance here in the San Pasqual.
Yeah, this was a good effort from him. Like you said, he had run a good second to Charlatan in that Malibu, who I guess is bound for Saudi from what I hear for their big race. So he ran a 118 that day, and he got a 119 for his win on Saturday. So not the most exciting grade 2 when you talk about it numerically. I mean, you'd like to see the horses getting in the mid 120s, but such is the state of the crop right now that it's just not very strong, and we're kind of waiting for horses to step up. King Guillermo was one who maybe some people thought would step up, but he just doesn't seem to be himself anymore. Not sure what went wrong with him. And Idol had come in off of a pretty good string of races. He was narrowly beaten by Kiss Today Goodbye, but I'm not sure what happened with him. He was just taken way back for some reason off of what was at best a moderate pace, and just could never really catch the winner. So just a so-so grade 2 for me, but I guess that's what we have for now.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed in the effort of Idol. I was also a little disappointed in the ride that he got. I know that they're giving Gabriel Saez a shot to have this top-level horse, and they brought him in for each of his last 2 races in California, even though that's not where he rides. And nothing against him as a rider. I just feel like the Santa Anita racetrack, you might want a rider that's a little more familiar with it, because, I mean, you can talk about making figures there. It's a very slow, deep surface, and he kind of rode Idol almost like a turf horse in this race, just held up at the back of the pack the entire way, and then kind of unleashed him like he was going to be able to sprint for home the last quarter mile, and it's just not the way your horses are effective over this very deep and tiring Santa Anita dirt track. It's more of a war of attrition out there, which Express Train obviously won. He traveled well most of the way and gradually moved into the race and took it over, and Idol just didn't really have the acceleration to get into the race as late as he was asked to make his run. I do think Idol is much closer in raw ability to Express Train than this finishing position would indicate, but he just didn't get the ride to be successful here.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to. It was a bit puzzling to me that He just basically didn't ride him at all early, which was surprising. The surface you mentioned, it's kind of funny for a guy at my age. I remember reading the Andy Beyer books, and the first time he went to Santa Anita, being fascinated by the almost black colored dirt and the times that were being put up. And I don't want to be get off my lawn guy, but those times are long gone because Santa Anita is one of the slower tracks out there, particularly for a warm weather climate where it hardly ever rains. So it's obviously being maintained that way intentionally, but it's certainly been different these last couple years. And yeah, you don't want to be in last trying to make up a bunch of ground with which essentially is a tired horse, because they're all tired running over this deep surface when they turn for home.
Yeah, it almost reminds me a little bit of the Aqueduct dirt track that we have in the winter now. It's just gets very slow on some days, and the horses that handle it will post some very big figures at times, and others just don't handle it, and there'll be some really strung out fields across the wire. That's just something that I think we've gotten accustomed to watching both of these tracks this winter. Moving back down south to Gulfstream Park on the East Coast, we're going to talk about the rest of the races they ran on Saturday down there. The Grade 3 Swale, going 7 furlongs on the dirt, was won by Drain the Clock, a horse that's really done nothing wrong in the races that he's finished in his career. He did lose the rider in one start, but his other 4 races, he's won them all and done it pretty impressively. I do want to say his main rivals probably didn't show up with the efforts that they were expected to here, but still, he's a horse that's been pretty consistent, and he just keeps getting it done.
Yeah, he keeps getting it done, and his figure keeps improving, although this time it was just a little bit from a 105 to a 106. I'm not sure what to make of him at this point. I think he's definitely just a sprinter. He's not a horse I'd be itching to see go longer. And he hasn't run particularly fast, so he's the kind I'd probably take on if he were to face some stronger competition down the line. But so far, that competition has yet to surface. He was even money in here for a reason. As you said, his probably main competition on paper was Likeable coming out of that Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but he just didn't really show up at all. He kind of had nothing for him, so it was just a walk in the park, almost like a paid workout for Drain the Clock.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not sure that I see this horse relishing much more added ground. I know after the race they talked about maybe wanting to try the Fountain of Youth next. I mean, good luck to him there. I think he'd be hard-pressed to beat some of the horses that we saw in the Holy Bull, particularly the winner of that race. But you never know. I think this horse has some pedigree to suggest maybe a mile would be okay. But I think he'd also have to run faster to get to have a shot in those kinds of races. Moving over to the turf course, the Sweetest Chant was the 3-year-old race that they ran for the fillies later in the day on Saturday at Gulfstream Park. And this is one that we talked about in the forecast last week, and it really played out, at least in terms of the result, the way that we thought it would. Not so much in terms of the way the pace played out, as Cone Lima did get away to a pretty moderate early pace all by herself. The horse that was expected to challenge her just was not aggressively ridden for whatever reason, so that really gave the advantage to Cone Lima, but apparently she needed more of an advantage than that, because White Frost, who ran by her in the stretch, she was just too good for this field.
Yeah, she's a real runner. She had run a 110, breaking her maiden first time on the turf. She only, I say only with kind of air quotes here, ran a 105 in this race, but she's the kind of horse I think the pace is going to dictate what she runs. She did get a pace upgrade last time because it was so slow, but I think she's got more in the tank. I mean, she ran by the 6-5 favorite who had things her own way with relative ease en route to that 105, and she's a horse I just really think is at the top of the division right now. I know she's got to eventually, maybe she'll have to deal with Aunt Pearl, but just the difference in running styles on the surface, if they were to meet up next time out, I really like what I see from White Frost, and I'm going to be on her bandwagon for a while until she proves me wrong.
Yeah, I'm very high on this horse. She's shown a turn of foot in the last couple races that is just extremely dangerous on the turf, especially in that maiden win at Aqueduct, but also here. She was bottled up in behind horses for much of the way, well off the pace, and And I say well off the pace. I mean, considering how slowly they were going up front, it is difficult to make up ground at Gulfstream at times when the leader is allowed to walk on the lead. And it was really just a matter of whether Junior Alvarado was going to be able to find a seam for her at the top of the stretch, because you knew if she got through, once she found some daylight, she was going to rocket past this field, and she had plenty of time to do it. Junior gave her a perfect ride, finding a split at the top of the stretch. So I'll just be interested to see what she can do in the future, and if she can run under those faster speed figures when she gets in a race with a bit more of a favorable pace scenario. The version of this race for the males was run early on this card, the Grade 3 Kitten's Joy, though these colts did not go nearly as fast as the fillies, and this race did produce a bit of an upset as Chess's Dream just got a perfect trip coming up the rail to beat a couple of favorites here, including the 1-5 favorite Never Surprised, who just barely gets up for second. I do have to say, the ride on Never Surprised was a little puzzling and definitely did him no favors.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure what was going on there. It's one as great a rider as Irad Ortiz is. He kind of has this thing on turf. You know the ride you're going to get. He's very rarely going to go to the front. He's going to take back, and I'm just not sure he's the guy that's going to fit this horse. He was on him for the first time, but I personally would have rather seen anyone else on him than Irad after seeing that ride. It was pretty ugly, and we didn't really dwell too much on it last time, or when we were talking about the last race, but that turf sprinter who didn't go, it makes you wonder what these guys are thinking sometimes. Not just the rider, because we don't know if the connections are telling them to do this. There's no way for us to know. But, in that Swedish chant that we talked about, what was the point of that horse being in the race if she wasn't going to go? Some of those things are really puzzling. I'm not sure what to make of it as a handicapper, but I am learning that you just got to kind of not be as excited that it's going to be a fast pace, because so many times they just don't develop when it looks obvious on paper. Maybe these guys read the PPs and say, I don't want to go. I'm probably going to get in a duel, but for whatever reason, they don't develop. And I think that was much to the detriment of Never Surprised. Got him in trouble and got him beat in the end. Chess's Dream ran okay. Only got a 97 TimeformUS speed figure, so not a whole lot to talk about there. Obviously, his connections made the right choice. He was entered at Sam Houston, but he wound up winning the Grade 3 here, so they made the right call there, which is kind of surprising seeing they were in against Never Surprised. On paper, you'd think they'd want to go the other route, but decent effort by him, but not one I'm going to get too excited about.
Yeah, you mean you're preaching to the choir with regard to the pace discussion here. Sometimes it feels like it's more about handicapping the riders than handicapping the horses, and that's just a frustrating thing to do. And in this case, I mean, I guess you might have said that John Velasco was just more likely to be aggressive than Irad Ortiz, and especially Julien Leparoux, who was riding the other speed horse, Kentucky Pharaoh. If you have a speed horse, you might want to put a speed rider on that horse if you want that kind of ride. I mean, maybe that's just something that the connections have to start adjusting for. But I don't know. Maybe it was the plan to try to rate Never Surprised in here. It does give a turf horse options to not be a need the lead type. So who knows? For all we know, maybe that was Todd Pletcher's idea. But it definitely hurt him here, because watching the race, you could even see that Never Surprised was not really comfortable with those rating tactics. He was fighting the rider as Irad tried to get him off the pace heading into the first turn. And even beyond that, the fact that he was out of position, he got a 3 to 4 wide uncovered trip around both turns. And that's just never the kind of trip that you want on the turf. I don't know why you would choose that kind of trip. It just doesn't really make sense. And it's frustrating because Never Surprised is a horse that looked like maybe the best of his generation on the turf last year. He ran a couple of speed figures in his first 2 starts that suggested he was better than the horses that we saw in the Breeders' Cup. Now, those races, I guess, do have to be validated as he runs back as a 3-year-old, but still, you do want to give him another chance if he gets an aggressive ride next time, because it just feels like we didn't see the true version of him here. Let's finish things up with one more race from Gulfstream Park. That was a maiden race, also on the turf on Saturday, won by King of Dreams. This horse going out for the same connections as King Guillermo, who was not successful in the San Pasqual, but did have a nice 3-year-old season last year for these guys. And King of Dreams was getting on turf for the first time here after making one prior start at Aqueduct, and he certainly looked good. This is definitely his preferred surface.
Yeah, he went off a pretty big price too for a trainer who's known to get them to run much better second time out than first. Obviously, there was a surface switch here, but he took a lot of money first time out in that maiden special on the dirt and took none here, which I thought was a bit interesting. But big effort from him. He got a 101 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, which we just talked about a stakes race that only got a 98. I believe 97 or 98. I've already forgotten that. That's what happens when you're 53. But King of Dreams, yeah, good effort, and look forward to seeing this one come back because he definitely took to the grass very well, and I believe he has the breeding to do so. But I'll let you talk about that more too. I mean, obviously, he liked the grass more, but I think it was the right surface, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, he's a son of Air Force Blue. There is pedigree on the dam side that goes really either way with regard to dirt or turf, but definitely to go longer. So I get why they started him on dirt first time out, given that they paid, I think, a good price for him at the auction as I believe, a 2-year-old in training. But he definitely took to the turf here, as some horses just do. They have a preference for one surface over the other, regardless of what their pedigree says. And he did get a perfect trip here. The pace was pretty even. It was on the moderate side, and nobody really challenged him in the early going, and that allowed him to kick for home in a race where the top two just dominated up front. But I still thought this horse looked good and finished up well and seemed like one that might be able to go forward.
Yeah, and sometimes that can be deceiving in maiden races because you just don't know what kind of runners they are in behind sometimes. So I try not to put too much stock in. Well, obviously, looking at the running lines, it kind of looks like a merry-go-round. Sometimes it's really hard to judge those because maybe the ones behind them just couldn't run.
Moving over to Oaklawn Park, where one of 2 stakes races they ran on Saturday was the American Beauty for the older fillies and mares, going 6 furlongs on the dirt. This was a race we talked about on the forecast last Friday, though. The race did change quite a bit based on the scratches. Ladies Island, who I guess they just chose not to make the trip to Oaklawn from her Florida base, her coming out really changed the pace complexion of this race, and it allowed the 2 horses who finished first and second to just kind of dominate up front, those being Frank's Rocket and Amy's Challenge.
Yeah, sometimes that's the danger of doing a show a little early. Not that we have much choice, but we made it pretty clear Ladies Island was a big reason we were a bit against Frank's Rocket in here. But without her, the complexion completely changed and the 2 speeds went off and basically had their own little match race. Amy's Challenge took the lead, but I don't want to take too much away from Frank's Rocket. She ran well. She could have easily not caught Amy's Challenge, who kind of had things alone up on the front end, but Frank's Rocket does what she does most often. She won. She got a 112 TimeformUS speed figure. So just in that range where if she ever faces that right field with a lot of speed, I'm going to be ready to bet against her again. But when she gets a field like this where she has the best speed figures, she's going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Frank's Rocket's in no danger of beating a horse like Gamine if they face off in a race going 6 or 7 furlongs. But against these easier fields, these listed stakes, these grade 3 level events, she's always going to be tough. She's got that versatile running style where she can be on the lead or stalk, and that just makes her dangerous. So a nice win by her, but she'll obviously face some tougher fields from here. The other stakes that ran on Saturday at Oaklawn was the Martha Washington, a prep race for the Kentucky Oaks, a prep race for their local preps like the Fantasy, which will come later in this season. This was just a listed stakes going a mile, though, and not the strongest field overall. Coach, who was second here, was the odds-on favorite, and she just looked like she was a little bit lost in the mud, and the one that really handled the surface was the winner, Will Secret.
Yeah, I don't want to put a whole lot of stock in this race given the mud. We came in, all the horses had run in the basically mid-90s to 100 mark, and that's pretty much what they did in the race. The winner, Will Secret, got a 99. Coach 94, Joy's Rocket 94 in third. So not the strongest race at all. I will give, say it was maybe the mud hindered a couple, like coaches just say, but it's not like they were that fast coming in. So nothing in here is too scary for me going forward. I would look for some new shooters in the next round at Oaklawn.
Moving on to Sam Houston on Sunday, where they had their stakes-laden card there. We talked about a couple of them on the forecast last week. One that we didn't mention, though, was the Grade 3 Houston Ladies Classic, arguably the feature on that card. And the reason we didn't talk about it was because there was a heavy favorite, Latruska, and she delivered here. She was facing a field that she was supposed to beat, but she certainly did it the right way. Got a little pace pressure early, but she just asserted her dominance in the final quarter.
Yeah, and I liked what I saw from Latruska. She had gotten to be kind of a runoff a couple times, but these last couple races, she's figured it out a little bit and was able to rate. In that last race at Gulfstream in the 1 turn mile, she was able to slow it down and just blow the field away. And here she faced a little early pressure and didn't go particularly quick. Was able to rate and just prove she's superior. She got a 119 TimeformUS speed figure, and I mean, she was very deserving of the 2 to 5 looking at the outcome. And I like what I saw from her. I like that she's able to not run off and just kind of use her speed to control things and draw away at the end.
Yeah, and actually that race 2 back at Gulfstream was the first race where they had taken the blinkers off, and I would imagine the blinkers are one reason why she was getting so headstrong in the early stages of her races. Now it's twice in a row that she's raced without the blinkers, and as you said, she's just been much more relaxed, still a front-running type, but she's able to slow things down a little bit on the front end, and she's earning these TimeformUS speed figures in the high 1 teens, but doing it the right way, whereas before she would speed off and kind of be life and death to hold on at the end, and would earn a big TimeformUS speed figure because she was getting such a big pace bump at the end. Now she's doing it where she's running a faster final time number because she's finishing off these races stronger. So I like what I've seen from her. She was obviously facing some overmatched rivals here, but based on the numbers that she's running now and the fact that she's got this running style that's a bit more moderated, she could tackle some tougher fields later in the year. I wouldn't be surprised if she can be more effective against grade 2, grade 1 company down the line. And I just want to say before we move on from this race, the runner-up here, Ujjayi, she was no match for Latruska, but she is a horse that you can point to as one that's actually run the 2 best races of her career since they've taken off Lasix in the last 2 starts. She ran really well without Lasix in the ladies at Aqueduct last time, and now here she ran her career best speed figure without Lasix. She was actually one of the only horses that competed without Lasix in this race because you can use it in stakes at Sam Houston, whereas you can't at a lot of other jurisdictions. But they kept it off, and she still ran her optimal effort.
Yeah, that's a good point on her. I didn't want to mention her because I didn't have the slightest idea how to pronounce that name.
I'm just guessing. I've heard some announcers say it that way. Moving on to the other stakes that ran at Santa Anita at Sam Houston on Sunday, including a couple on the turf. The one that was run right after the Houston Ladies Classics was the John B. Connolly going 1.5 miles, and that was won by the favorite, Spooky Channel. She was just the horse to beat coming in. He was the classiest runner in the race, and he got a pretty good chip from Julian Leperoux, stalking in mid-pack before taking over. The runner-up, A Journey to Freedom, who I know we both liked, he did take a big step forward, stretching out as many Mike Maker horses do. He just came up a little bit short.
Yeah, he did, but no excuses. I think Spooky Channel just got the jump on him. He moved early, and I'm not even sure that was an advantage other than gaining the ground because he was kind of out in the clear the whole way, and I think he was best. I'm not going to try to say A Journey to Freedom was better. He did get bet down. You can't fool bettors for very long. They're on to the Mike Maker angle, who ran second and third in here, and his stablemate Conviction Trade obviously went out, set a fast pace. I don't know if the plan was for him to be a rabbit, but that's how it turned out. But Spooky Channel ran a really good race. He got a 119 TimeformUS speed figure, which is right in his wheelhouse, and he's just, he's a pretty cool horse. We had suggested, I agreed with you that I wasn't sure these 1.5 mile distances are his best, and I'm still not, but he's good enough to win at him when things go when he meets the right field. So versatile horse that can probably show up and be a contender anywhere from 1.8 miles up to 1.5 miles.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He is very versatile. He's got a variety of distances that he handles, and he can also use a variety of running styles. So that always gives the riders and connections option with a horse like him. And he loves to win races. He's now won half of his 18 starts. So just a lot to say about Spooky Channel in the positive direction. And Mike Maker, he continues to do well in these races. He didn't get the victory here, but he had the second and third place finishers, A Journey to Freedom and Conviction Trade, both of whom he just recently stretched out in distance. A Journey to Freedom here, but Conviction Trade in his last 2 starts, he went all the way out to 2 miles, 2 back, and he went 1.5 miles here, and he's run 2 of the best races of his career. So just Mike Maker's specialty. Even when he doesn't win these races, he gets these horses to run career best efforts. Finishing things up at Sam Houston and cutting all the way back in distance to 5 furlongs in the Pulse Power Turf Sprint, we saw Fast Boat get back to one of his better races, and we had talked about it on the forecast last week. If this horse showed up, he was just going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, he he got back to his better races. He got a 116 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. And as we had talked about on the forecast, with these turf sprints, it's kind of hard. You can't just go by the purse or even sometimes the grade. You really got to look at the fields of the races that they're in. And Fast Boat had just been in against tougher horses. Horses like Leinster and Arky Dust and Maniwa, who tried turf for the last time and exploded that day. So he kind of had the field over barrel and showed up and ran his best race. So I imagine we'll see him in some more tough spots going forward. And it just pays to analyze the fields just as much as things that we usually talk about, like figures, grade of the race. And these turf sprints are just more about comparing horse to horse for me.
Now, we talked about many 3-year-old stakes races on this podcast this week, but arguably some of the fastest 3-year-olds were in action at the fairgrounds in a maiden race this last weekend on Saturday, as He's in Charge won a 6-furlong maiden event by a couple lengths, and he got a speed figure that, I don't know if you did this one or your assistant, Craig, but I would imagine this is one that you want to keep tabs on moving forward because you just don't often see maiden races coming up this fast.
No, for sure. And this is one my assistant did, and I didn't really notice how fast it was until you sent that rundown for the show today. But when I pulled up our worksheet, I wouldn't have done anything differently. Now, I'll be the first to admit there wasn't a ton to go on that day. There were only 2 sprints, and they were separated by a couple turf races. But there were 4 routes on the card, both before and after these sprints. And they held pretty steady. They held really steady throughout the day. And if I can trust the time of the 10th race and apply it to the 7th, it's hard to knock the figure. I would have done the same exact thing. The only other option would be to say we don't trust it and not give it a figure. And we don't want to do that when we can. So it's one I'll be keeping an eye on, but one that certainly looks really quick because the winner got a 115 and all 3 of the top horses in the field got a 110 plus. Now, granted, they were all first-time starters except the winner who had run on synthetic first time out. So basically all first-time starters on dirt, and it was pretty big gap back to 4th. So we'll just have to see how it plays out, but it's certainly one I'll keep an eye on. And for now, I have no reason to doubt the figure other than it just looks really fast.
Yeah, it certainly seems like a viable possibility. This is just a pretty strong maiden race with 3 very talented sprinters. The winner, He's in Charge, had shown absolutely nothing in his prior start on the synthetic at Turfway, but he was just a completely different horse on the dirt here for Al Stall. The bettors didn't know it. He went off at 28-1, but he got a great trip on the rail. I kind of looked through the charts at Fairgrounds to see if there was some kind of rail bias that might have elevated this speed figure, but I didn't see much evidence of that. He just saved ground every step of the way and had no trouble coming through inside to beat this field pretty soundly by over 3 lengths. The second and third place finishers, though, as you said, they both ran well. Wild for Wycliffe, he set the pace and held on pretty well for third with a 114 TimeformUS speed figure. And Tulane Trist, who was a pretty highly touted first-time starter coming into this race for Cherie DeVoe, who isn't necessarily known for firing first time out. He also ran very well, coming from just off the pace to get up for second here with a 111 TimeformUS speed figure. Just seems like a talented group of horses and one to follow moving forward. Well, those are all the stakes to recap for this week. We'll definitely get back into handicapping on Friday for the TimeformUS forecast. Craig, I haven't looked so much at what are the stakes coming up this week. It might be another relatively slow one. I know we do have a couple minor Derby preps on the schedule, including the Withers at Aqueduct going the mile and an eighth. So we'll talk about that perhaps and some others from around the country. But we'll connect later this week and talk about what looks best to us for that TimeformUS forecast. Everybody remember that you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch us on Friday for the TimeformUS forecast.